Hey everyone, this is Zach with 8020 Media, here today with a video on the Ford Mustang GT versus Mustang EcoBoost. The Ford Mustang GT and EcoBoost are very different cars even though they share so much in common, obviously both being Ford Mustangs. Nearly all of their differences boil down to the major difference between the engines found in the GT versus the Ford EcoBoost. So the Ford Mustang GT uses the 5-liter V8 Coyote engine, producing up to 486 horsepower and 420 foot-pounds of torque. On the other hand, the Mustang EcoBoost uses a much smaller 2.3-liter turbocharged inline-4 engine, producing up to 330 horsepower and 350 foot-pounds of torque. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump in and compare these two vehicles more closely, starting off with performance. As I mentioned, this is really the biggest difference between these two Mustangs is going to be performance and really the engines powering these two different Mustangs. Ultimately, the Mustang GT has an advantage of roughly 150 horsepower and about 80 foot-pounds of torque. So those differences in engines and power numbers really reflect in the performance numbers of the Mustang GT and Mustang EcoBoost. Looking at 0 to 60 times, the EcoBoost delivers a 0 to 60 mile an hour time of roughly 4.8 to 5 seconds. On the other hand, the Mustang GT bests that by about a full second, achieving 60 miles per hour in about 3.8 to 4 seconds. Looking at the Mustang EcoBoost, it's able to accomplish the quarter mile in about 13.7 seconds at roughly 98 miles an hour, and the Mustang GT, on the other hand, is able to run the quarter mile in roughly 12.2 seconds at about 117 miles an hour. So the quarter mile goes to show that there really is a pretty significant difference between the speed of the Mustang GT and EcoBoost. Ultimately, with the Mustang GT beating the EcoBoost by nearly 20 miles per hour and 1.5 seconds quicker, really goes to show that the Mustang GT has a pretty significant advantage when it comes to top-end power and performance, and naturally that's to be expected with its much larger 5-liter V8 engine compared to the small 2.3-liter inline-4. However, despite that big difference, where the EcoBoost maybe does have a slight advantage and can start closing that gap is when looking at aftermarket performance and modifications. This isn't to say that the 5.0 Coyote can't make massive numbers and doesn't have more potential. Ultimately, it does have way more potential considering it has over twice the displacement of the 2.3 EcoBoost and double the cylinder count. There is no replacement for displacement. If you talk about all-out builds, the 5.0 Coyote in the Mustang GT is still going to have a significant advantage, but if we tone it down a little bit and just talk about tuning and basic bolt-on mods, the turbocharged design of the Mustang EcoBoost makes it a lot easier to pick up significant power gains with a couple simple bolt-on mods. So talking about a tune, intake, intercooler, and downpipe, the 2.3 Mustang EcoBoost can make it to roughly 325 to 350 wheel horsepower and 425 plus foot-pounds of torque to the rear wheels. So those are very impressive numbers. Now again, the 5.0 Coyote does respond to modifications very well. However, it's not going to have nearly the same power potential or see the same power gains with similar modifications for naturally aspirated engines. So really, if you want to see those massive power gains with the 5.0 Coyote, it is going to require adding forced induction. So ultimately, my main point here is if you're picking up one of these cars and not looking to do some extreme build, but you do want to add a couple performance upgrades, the Mustang EcoBoost is going to respond better to those modifications. But with that said, I do just want to be clear that again, while the EcoBoost closes the gap, the Mustang GT with its much larger 5-liter Coyote engine is still going to be the quicker Mustang out of the two. So with that said, moving on to the next topic, talking about steering, feel, and handling. This is where the Mustang EcoBoost might actually have an ever so small advantage over the Mustang GT. The Mustang EcoBoost does actually weigh about 150 to 200 pounds less than the Mustang GT, and less of that weight is carried over the front axle thanks to the much smaller 2.3-liter inline-4 engine compared to the big 5-liter V8 found in the Mustang GT. So a little bit of an advantage there. That does make the Mustang EcoBoost feel a little bit more nimble and a little more tossable than the Ford Mustang GT. But still, ultimately, both of these cars are going to feel very similar and have a very similar degree of handling, steering, feedback, and overall feel from the vehicles. Just wanted to point out there, with the slightly lower weight of the EcoBoost and less weight over the front axle, that can help in making it feel a little bit more nimble and a little bit more tossable around the corners. Moving on to our final topics and comparing the Mustang GT and Mustang EcoBoost, this is where things start to shift a little bit more in favor of the Ford Mustang EcoBoost, and that's when it comes to price, fuel economy, and cost of ownership. The Mustang EcoBoost costs about $10,000 to $15,000 less than a similarly equipped Ford Mustang GT. That's if you're looking to buy them brand new. If you do look to buy a used EcoBoost or a used GT, then that gap in price does start to close a little bit, with most used examples of the EcoBoost being about $7,000 to $10,000 less expensive than a similar condition and similarly equipped Mustang GT. So again, that closes the gap a little bit, but still a pretty significant price difference, especially considering the engine is really the biggest difference between these vehicles, and you're not getting a whole lot else above and beyond that. There are some minor differences in other things you are getting with the GT that you aren't quite getting to the same degree with the EcoBoost. On top of that upfront cost to purchase one of these vehicles, whether brand new or in the used market, fuel economy is another major factor in the cost of ownership and maintaining these vehicles. The Mustang GT is going to be bested by the EcoBoost by roughly 7 to 10 miles per gallon. Of course, a lot of that depends on your driving style, where you're driving, how you're using the engines, and after years and tens of thousands of miles of driving, that can add up to a very significant difference in cost of ownership and actually driving the vehicles. So ultimately, in summary of the Mustang EcoBoost versus Mustang GT, the Mustang GT with its 5-liter Coyote V8 engine is really the true embodiment of the Ford Mustang and its history, with the big loud rumbling V8, and that's really the biggest benefit you get in purchasing the Ford Mustang GT. And you also get the better performance and power that come alongside having a big V8. So ultimately, the Ford Mustang GT delivers better 0 to 60 times by about a second, is about a second and a half faster through the quarter mile, at a pretty significant 15 to 20 miles per hour faster as well, which goes to show that the Ford Mustang GT does have a significant performance advantage over the EcoBoost. However, with that being said, the EcoBoost does have the advantage of tuning and modifications if you're just looking to do a couple basic bolt-ons. The turbocharged design of the 2.3 EcoBoost really aids in picking up significant power gains just from a couple basic bolt-on mods, which can help close the gap a little bit between the GT and the Mustang EcoBoost. But even with those modifications, even comparing it to a stock Mustang GT, the GT is still going to be the quicker, more powerful car between the two. And then another very small advantage to the EcoBoost, it's a little bit lighter than the Mustang GT by about 150 to 200 pounds, which can make it feel a little bit more nimble and a little bit more tossable when it comes to handling. And then lastly, really the biggest advantage to the Mustang EcoBoost is the price and its much better fuel economy, making it a very compelling value between the Mustang GT and Ford EcoBoost. So there really isn't a good answer as to which one is better. It depends what you value between the two. If you're looking for something that's fun, sporty, and still delivers great performance at a better price point with better fuel economy, then the Mustang EcoBoost is probably the better engine for you. However, if you're looking for that big, loud, rumbling V8 and ultimately the top of the line performance and power, then the Ford Mustang GT is probably going to be the better bet for you. Anyway, guys, that wraps up our video for today. If you appreciated the content, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more in the future. Thanks, everyone.